Welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary tales come to life. Enjoy the journey. The crystalline bridge sang a death note under Darius's shoes, and the 8-year-old knew with absolute certainty he was going to die. One moment he'd been following a flutter of bioluminescent butterflies through Vera Prime's market district. The next, he stood frozen on a span of pure crystal, no wider than his grandfather's arm, suspended 300 feet above the lower city. The bridge, if something so impossibly delicate deserved the name, connected two of the massive spiral towers that dominated the Veyron capital. Wind grabbed at his clothes, tried to pull him into that terrible drop where hovercars buzzed like insects far below. His grandfather's voice drifted from somewhere behind, probably still arguing trade routes with the Veyron Commerce Ministry. Too far, too late. Darius's legs locked, his hands shook. The crystal hummed higher with each tremor as if eager to shatter. "Don't look down." The voice came from above, musical, young, amused. A giant shadow fell across him, and Darius made the mistake of looking up. A Veyron girl perched on the tower's edge like gravity was optional. She couldn't have been more than 10, but she already stood 6 feet tall, her violet skin shimmering with those strange bioluminescent patterns all Veyrons had. Silver hair caught the afternoon sun and threw it back in mercury waves. Her golden eyes studied him with the casual interest of someone who'd found an unusual insect. "I said don't look down," she repeated in accented Terran. "You're doing it wrong." "I'm not," his voice cracked. "I'm not looking down." "You're thinking about down, same thing." She tilted her head and those patterns on her skin pulsed blue-green. "You're really small, even for a human." "I'm 8. I'm 10. She swung her legs over the edge, casual as sitting on a park bench. "Want help, or you planning to stand there until the wind knocks you off?" Pride warred with terror. Terror won. "Help! Please." She laughed, wind chimes in a gentle breeze, and extended one hand palm up. "Climb on." "Climb on what?" "My hand, tiny human, unless you've got wings hidden somewhere." The bridge sang louder. A hairline crack appeared under his left foot. Darius jumped. Her hand was warm, steadier than any ground he'd ever stood on. She lifted him like he weighed nothing, which to her, he probably didn't. This close, he could see her patterns weren't random. They followed her heartbeat, her breathing, flickering emotions across her skin in colors that had no human names. "I'm Renea," she said, setting him safely on the tower platform. "Darius." His legs wobbled, but he stayed standing. "Thanks for—" "You're the diplomat's grandson, the one negotiating the boring trade thing." She stood, and he had to crane his neck back to see her face. "Want to see something better than treaties?" She didn't wait for an answer, just started walking. After a moment, Darius jogged after her, taking 3 steps for each of hers. The something better turned out to be the undergrowth markets, a controlled chaos of vendors, species, and smells that made his head spin. Renea navigated it like she'd been born there, probably because she had. She bought him a bioluminescent fruit that tasted like starlight felt, taught him 3 words in Veyron. Vrex meant friend, Corvani meant promise, Sathara meant forever, and laughed herself breathless when he tried to haggle with a 4-armed merchant using only those words and wild hand gestures. "You just asked him to promise you eternal friendship with his tentacles," she gasped between laughs. "I was trying to buy the energy drink." "Even better." She wiped tears from her golden eyes. "He thinks you're proposing." They spent hours wandering. She showed him the singing fountains, the gravity gardens where water flowed upward, the pet market where tiny dragons the size of his thumb breathed flowers instead of fire. When a gang of older Veyron boys cornered them in an alley, demanding the human pet for their collection, Renea's patterns flared angry red, and she broke the leader's nose with a headbutt that sounded like thunder. "He's not a pet," she informed the bleeding boy. "He's Vrex. Mine." The sun was setting, painting everything purple and gold, when his grandfather's voice finally found them through the communication network. Time to leave. Time for treaties and formal dinners and adult things. Renea walked him to the diplomat's quarter. At the gate, she dug something from her pocket. A small spiral pendant on a chain, the metal warm against his palm. "It's nothing special," she said, her patterns flickering that blue-green again. "Just heart metal. All Veyron kids have them." But her pattern said she was lying. The color meant embarrassment, he'd learned. Shyness. Darius closed his fist around the warm metal, felt it pulse like a living thing. "If you're ever in trouble, I'll come save you. I promise." She laughed, bright and careless. "Little human, by the time you're grown, I'll be able to hold you in one hand. Then I'll just have to be very clever." She laughed again, ruffled his hair with fingers that could crush stone, and disappeared into the crowd of giants. 3 years later, the hollow feed showed Veyra Prime burning. The High Council declared the Veyrons a threat to galactic stability. Too strong, too advanced, too dangerous to live. The genocide was efficient, thorough, broadcast as a warning to other races that might grow too powerful. Darius searched every feed, every rescued broadcast, every leaked execution list. He never found Ranaya's name among the dead. He also never found her among the living. The pendant stayed warm against his chest, a promise wrapped in heart metal, waiting. 20 years was a long time to plan a rescue, but Darius Cole had been thorough. He sat in the arena's middle tier, tactical hood shadowing his face, looking like just another bloodthirsty spectator come to watch the last Titan blood die. His fingers found the pendant through his shirt, its warmth familiar as his own pulse. Around him, 50,000 beings from 100 worlds roared their anticipation. The hollow feeds would broadcast this to billions more. Justice, they called it. Entertainment, more like. The Echelon Spire's execution arena was built for maximum drama. Crystalline walls rose 500 feet, catching and amplifying every sound. The killing floor was pure white sand imported from some dead world, perfect for showing blood. Chancellor Vrex himself sat in the jade throne, his reptilian features practically glowing with satisfaction. They brought her out in chains that could hold a starship. Darius's body locked tighter than it had on that bridge 20 years ago. Renea Veyra walked onto the sand with her head high, and even in graviton shackles that forced each step, she moved like she owned the arena. 9 feet of controlled violence wrapped in violet skin that bore scars he'd memorized from grainy surveillance footage. Her silver hair was shorn military short, nothing like the mercury waves he remembered. Golden eyes swept the crowd with contempt that should have frozen them solid. She was magnificent. She was dying. She was 17 minutes ahead of schedule. The executioner, a Kredak warrior bred for killing, hefted his plasma halberd. The crowd went silent, savoring the moment before the blade fell. Darius was already moving. Years of special operations training kept his movements smooth, casual, just another spectator shifting for a better view. He vaulted the barrier during the perfect moment of crowd focus, his boots hitting sand with practiced silence. The executioner saw him first, confusion flickering across his 4 eyes. Darius stepped between Renaya and the blade, hand resting on the custom pistol that had cost him 3 years' salary and could punch through Kredak armor at close range. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, voice carrying through the arena's acoustics he'd studied for months, "but public executions really aren't my kink." The silence stretched taut. 50,000 beings held their breath. "Now," Darius continued, not letting his eyes find Renaya's, not yet, "I invoke the right of alliance, trial by alliance, Subsection 7 of your own tribunal codes. The accused has the right to a champion's defense if said champion shares her legal burden. I share it. 72 hours to prove innocence, or we die together. Chancellor Vreck stood, his scales flushing purple with rage. You dare? I do. Darius pulled back his hood, revealing the face that had haunted a few nightmares across the galaxy. Darius Cole, former Terran Special Operations, current pain in your ass, and very familiar with subsection 7, which you can't refuse without admitting your own laws are worthless. Behind him, Renea made a sound, sharp intake of breath, quickly controlled. Her patterns flared violet-white, visible even in his peripheral vision. The crowd erupted. The hollow feeds went insane. And Darius finally turned to look at the woman he'd spent 20 years preparing to save. Up close, she was nothing like the girl from the markets and everything like her at once. The bones were the same under new muscle, the eyes still that impossible gold, but experience had carved itself into every line of her. She looked at him like he was a ghost, a dream, a nightmare. Her lips shaped a word that didn't quite make it to sound. "Hello, Renea," he said quietly, too low for the feeds to catch. "Sorry I'm late." The holding cell was built for giants, which meant Darius could have done wind sprints while Renea paced. She hadn't said a word during the forced march from the arena, hadn't looked at him while the guards, nervous now, trigger-happy, shoved them into the cell to await trial terms. The moment the door sealed, she spun to face him, and he had to tilt his head back to meet her eyes. "You," she said. Her voice had deepened, enriched like aged whiskey, but that musical quality still threaded through it. "The little human from the markets." Not so little anymore. He pulled back the tactical suit's collar, revealing scars that told their own stories. Though I guess perspective is relative. Her patterns pulsed, analyzing, categorizing, trying to reconcile the child with the man. "You're insane. You've just signed your death warrant for a stranger." He pulled the pendant from beneath his shirt in one smooth motion. The heart metal still glowed faint rose gold, still pulsed warm like something alive. A child's trinket, a 20-year promise. Everything stopped. Her patterns exploded across her skin. Gold, violet, silver, colors that probably had names he'd never learned. For the first time in what he suspected was years, her control cracked completely. She sank onto the metal bench that groaned under her weight, staring at the pendant like it might disappear. "You kept it." Her voice broke on the last word. 20 years, and you kept a child's trinket. "It's not a trinket if it means something." Darius sat on the floor, giving her space while staying close enough to prove he was real. "And I've been busy. Took me 15 years to track you down, 5 more to get the resources to get you out." Her hand rose toward the pendant, stopped just short of touching. "How?" "Started with the massacre recordings. Never found your body. Spent 3 years hacking council databases before I found transport manifests suggesting someone had evacuated high-value Vayrans before the final assault." He kept his voice steady, clinical, like he was briefing a mission. "Another 2 years to trace those transports to Kremler slave markets. You were 17. I was 19. I couldn't—" Her hand closed around his throat, not squeezing, just resting there, fingers wrapping almost completely around. Her patterns flared red gold. 5 years, she said. "I was in those pits for 5 years while you knew." "I knew you were alive. I didn't know where until you were already sold." The weight of her hand was familiar. He'd trained with weighted collars to prepare for this exact scenario. Private buyer, underground fighter circuits. You disappeared for 3 years. Surfaced again in the Outer Rim Wars as a mercenary. Then the council grabbed you 6 months ago on fabricated charges. "You've been watching me." Not a question. "I've been preparing." He met her eyes steadily. Every credit I earned went to information. Every contact I made was aimed at finding you. Every skill I learned was to survive long enough to keep a promise." She released his throat, her pattern cycling through emotions too complex to parse. "Why?" "You know why. I was 10. You were 8. Children make impossible promises, and adults keep them." He stood, pulled a small hollow projector from his belt. "Which brings us to now. The Council's going to offer us a deal. 72 hours to find evidence of your innocence in the undergrowth. They think it's impossible. They don't know I've spent 3 years mapping every corridor, bribing every information broker, hiding supply caches in 17 different sectors." The holo bloomed to life, building schematics, guard rotations, safe routes marked in green, extraction points in blue. "This is insane," she breathed, standing to her full height. "You can't have, this must have cost everything. It cost everything." He looked up at her, allowing himself the ghost of a smile. "Good thing I never wanted anything else." Her patterns did something he'd never seen in surveillance footage. They dimmed to almost nothing, like she was pulling everything inward. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "I won't be responsible for your death." "Too late. I'm already committed." He gestured to the walls around them. "Besides, I told you 20 years ago. I'd have to be clever. Can't save a 9-foot warrior goddess with brute force." The patterns flared briefly. "Goddess. Well, you've definitely grown into the role. Very statuesque, intimidating. The whole deadly grace thing really works for you." For a moment, just a moment, her lips twitched toward a smile. Then the cell door opened, and Chancellor Vrex's honor guard entered. "Time for the terms," Darius said, securing the projector. "Follow my lead and try to look like you barely tolerate me." "That won't be hard," she muttered, but her patterns pulsed warm gold. He'd learned that meant amusement. Good. She'd need her sense of humor for what came next. Chancellor Vrex's throne room reeked of power and decay, ionized air from the force fields, rotting fruit from some dignitary's ceremonial offering, and underneath it all, the copper tang of old blood ground into marble that no amount of cleaning could erase. Darius cataloged exits, 7, guards, 12 visible, 4 hidden, and weapons, energy pikes, plasma sidearms, 1 sniper 3 levels up, while pretending to stumble like a man walking to his death. Beside him, Renea moved with liquid grace despite the graviton shackles, her patterns dimmed to almost nothing. "The human who thinks himself clever," Vrex said, his forked tongue tasting the air. 400 pounds of scaled muscle shifted on the jade throne. Darius Cole, destroyer of the Kremler slave ring, the ghost who killed Senator Vale's son. Allegedly killed, Darius corrected. Never proven. The proof bled out on a Rigel station floor. Vrex's scales flushed purple with amusement. "You've been busy these 20 years, building quite the reputation. All for this?" He gestured at Renea. "For a defeated race's last gasp? I'm a romantic. Sue me." Renea's patterns flickered, just for a second, warm gold at his edges. She'd caught the deflection, the way he kept Vrex focused on him instead of her. "Your romance will be short-lived." Vrex stood, all 8 feet of him. "The terms are simple. 72 hours. You will descend into the undergrowth and retrieve the data core that proves the terrorist's innocence, if such a thing exists, which it doesn't. When you fail, you both die. Publicly. Slowly. And if we succeed, she goes free. You, little human, are exiled from council space forever." His tongue flicked out again. "Though I wouldn't pack your bags just yet." Darius felt Renea tense beside him. Through their brief contact in the cell, he'd learned her tells, the way her weight shifted before violence, how her breathing changed when she was calculating odds. "One condition," Darius said before she could move. "We go unmonitored. No trackers, no surveillance. just the time limit. You're hardly in a position to negotiate. Subsection 7, paragraph 3. Darius smiled with teeth. The accused and champion have the right to investigate without prejudice or interference. Your own laws, Chancellor. Unless you'd like the feeds to wonder why you're afraid of one human and one chained Veyron. The silence stretched taut. Around them, the hidden guards shifted positions. The sniper above adjusted his scope. Fine. Vrex's word dripped venom. 72 hours. Starting now. The shackles fell from Renea's wrists with a sound like breaking mountains. She rolled her shoulders, and every guard in the room took an involuntary step back. 9 feet of unleashed potential energy stood free for the first time in 6 months, patterns beginning to pulse along her arms like war drums. "Run along, little champions," Vrex said. "The undergrowth is hungry this time of year." The maintenance shaft dropped 300 levels in 40 seconds, and Renea's patterns lit up like a constellation map during the fall. "You're enjoying this," Darius observed, hanging onto the emergency handles while she stood perfectly balanced, riding the plummeting platform like it was a gentle elevator. 6 months in chains, she said, silver hair whipping around her face. "You'd enjoy it too." The platform slammed to a stop. Darius's knees buckled. Renea caught his arm before he could fall, her hand wrapping entirely around his bicep. "Thanks. Can't have my champion dying before the fun starts." Her patterns pulsed, teasing amber. "Where to, strategist?" The undergrowth opened before them, a vertical labyrinth of rusted metal, flickering lights, and shadows that moved wrong. 20 levels of abandoned sectors, black markets, and desperate souls who'd fallen through the cracks of the spire's perfect society. The air tasted like machine oil and desperation. Darius led them through routes he'd walked in dreams for 3 years, left at the defunct processing plant, right through the narrow gap between 2 support pillars, down the maintenance ladder that looked broken but held if you knew which rungs to skip. "You've been here before," Renea said, not a question. "Hundreds of times." He stopped at what looked like a solid wall, pressed his palm against a specific rust pattern. A panel slid open, revealing a cache, weapons, credits, 2 sets of clothing, emergency rations. Had to make sure everything was perfect. She watched him check each weapon with practiced efficiency. "When you say everything," 17 caches, 3 safe houses, 12 documented routes to the Council's data vaults, 6 extraction points. He handed her a plasma rifle sized for her hands, custom work that must have cost a fortune. "I modeled different scenarios for 3 years, ran probability matrices. This version, where you're accused of terrorism and we have 72 hours, had a 23% likelihood. You planned for multiple scenarios?" 47. He pulled on a tactical vest, began loading pockets with tools he'd planted here 18 months ago. "Ranging from you being publicly executed with no warning, that was tricky, to the Council offering you a deal to work for them." Her pattern shifted to deep purple he hadn't cataloged yet. "And if none of your scenarios happened?" Scenario 48. "I break you out during transport, consequences be damned." "That's not a plan. That's suicide." "That's why it was last resort." He sealed the cache, memorized her expression, something between disbelief and what might have been admiration. "We need to move. First safe house is 20 minutes through the merchant quarter." She followed him into the maze of the undergrowth, and for a while they moved in silence. He guided them past the dangerous sections, the organ harvest markets, the neural modification shops, the fighting pits that would have recognized her instantly. She adapted to his rhythm, ducking when he ducked, stopping when he raised a fist, moving like they'd been partners for years instead of hours. "There," he pointed to a gap between 2 massive support structures. "Tight fit, but it cuts 15 minutes. She eyed the space. "I won't fit." "You will. Trust me." You measured it? I measured everything. The gap was exactly 3 inches wider than her shoulders. He knew because he'd paid a maintenance worker to widen it 14 months ago. She had to turn sideways, duck her head, but she fit. Barely. Her patterns glowed brighter in the confined space, casting purple-gold light on rusty metal. Your markings, he said, leading her through the narrow passage. They respond to adrenaline, among other things. Her voice was carefully neutral. They're beautiful. She stopped so suddenly he almost fell. In the confined space, her patterns flared bright enough to blind. What? He asked, blinking away after images. Nobody's ever... She cut herself off. We should keep moving. But her pattern stayed warm gold for the next 10 minutes. The safe house was a converted storage unit tucked behind a noodle shop that served things better left unidentified. Darius had paid the owner for 3 years of silence, and the man didn't even look up when they passed. Cozy, Renea said, taking in the 10 by 20 space packed with surveillance equipment, weapons, and supplies. Functional. Darius activated the security screens, watching 16 different feeds from cameras he'd hidden throughout the district. We've got maybe 6 hours before... The proximity alarm screamed. On screen 3, council assassins, Corvin mercenaries in stealth suits, moved through the market. On screen 7, another team swept in from the opposite direction. They found us already. Renea's pattern shifted to combat-ready crimson. No, they're sweeping grid by grid. Darius's fingers flew across the controls, analyzing their search pattern. But they'll be here in 12 minutes. Unless... He pulled a device from his vest, something that looked like a child's toy but had cost him 2 years' savings. Unless what? Unless we give them something more interesting to chase. He pressed the button. 6 blocks away, one of his caches exploded. The assassin teams immediately diverted, their comm chatter exploding across the frequencies Darius had long ago learned to monitor. While they investigated the false lead, he and Renea slipped out the back, heading deeper into the undergrowth. They'd made it 3 levels down when the real team found them. The first shot took out the light above Renea's head. The second would have taken out her head if Darius hadn't tackled her behind a support column. Snipers, he said against her ear, her patterns bright enough to read by. 3 positions. They're herding us toward... The kill team rounded the corner. 6 Corvin mercenaries in full combat gear, moving in perfect synchronization. Renea moved before he could stop her. She crossed 15 feet in 2 strides, her fist connecting with the lead mercenary's chest plate. The armor, rated to stop plasma rounds, crumpled like paper. The mercenary flew backward into his squad mates, and then Renea was among them, 9 feet of controlled violence that moved like water and struck like meteors. Darius dropped 2 snipers with precision shots, then spun to cover her blind spot. A mercenary tried to flank her. Darius put 3 rounds center mass before the man could raise his weapon. They moved together without thought, without communication. She was power. He was precision. She was the storm. He was the eye. When the last mercenary fell, they stood back to back in a circle of unconscious bodies, both breathing hard. You're bleeding, he said, noting the graze on her shoulder where a sniper's shot had kissed her skin. You're not. She turned to look at him, patterns pulsing with something that might have been surprise. You killed 3 of them. To protect me. I'd kill 300. The words came out before he could stop them. Her patterns flared so bright he had to look away. The building above them exploded. Darius grabbed her hand. His fingers didn't even close around half of it and pulled her toward the emergency shaft. Behind them, walls began collapsing in a very specific pattern. Did you, she started, 3 years ago, shape charges in a cascade pattern. They dove into the shaft as the ceiling collapsed behind them. In case we needed a distraction. You mined the entire sector? just the structural points. They landed hard on the level below, her catching him before his ankles could snap from the impact. I had contingencies for contingencies. Told you. Clever. More explosions above. The assassination team's comm chatter turned to panic. In the chaos, Darius led them to another maintenance shaft, this one barely wide enough for Renea to squeeze through. They pressed inside, her back against one wall, him against her chest, nowhere else to go. Her patterns provided the only light, pulsing with her heartbeat. This close, he could feel the heat they generated, smell something like charged air and wildflowers on her skin. "Your markings," he murmured, trying to ignore how her breath stirred his hair. "They're brighter when you're—" "When I'm what?" Her voice dropped dangerous and low, vibrating through his chest. "Interested." He couldn't help the grin that curved his lips. They were doing the same thing when that Altarian merchant was flirting with you earlier. Her patterns flared indignant orange. "That's not— I wasn't—" "Relax, princess. Your secret's safe." He tilted his head back to look up at her, finding golden eyes already staring down. Though for the record, his pickup lines were terrible. "Your scales would complement mine? Really? You're not even reptilian." Despite everything, the danger, the confined space, the fact that they were being hunted, she laughed. Quiet and brief, but real. The sound echoed in the shaft, wrapped around them like a secret. "How long do we stay here?" she asked when the laughter faded. "Until they finish searching the wreckage. 20 minutes, maybe 30. Her pattern shifted to a slow, steady pulse he hadn't seen before. "And you're going to spend that time analyzing my patterns. Would you prefer I analyze something else?" The pulse shifted, became something warmer. "You really spent 20 years planning this? Every second. Why?" The question was soft, almost vulnerable. The real reason. Not duty, not promises. Why? In the close darkness, with her patterns painting shadows on the walls, he told the truth. "Because that day in the market, you were the first person who ever looked at me and saw someone worth saving. Not the diplomat's grandson, not the small human child. Just Darius." He felt her breath catch. And because every year after, when things got bad, when Earth fell, when I was bleeding out in some back alley, when the plan seemed impossible, I'd hold that pendant and remember that once, a girl made of starlight thought I was worth her time. Her hand found his face in the darkness, fingers gentle despite their size. "You were 8 years old." "Best decision I ever made was at 8, apparently." She laughed again, and this time her patterns danced gold and silver and colors that had no names. They found Korvax in the deep reaches, where even the desperate feared to go. The old Veyron ran a memory parlor, a place where beings paid to experience others' memories, to live lives they'd never had. His patterns had long ago dimmed to almost nothing, age and trauma leaving only the faintest glow along his arms. "Princess," he wheezed when he saw Renea, attempting to bow despite joints that creaked like old ships. "I thought you were dead." Disappointed? Relieved. His golden eyes, clouded with cataracts, found Darius. "And you brought the human who's been asking questions for years. Persistent little Vrex, aren't you? You know him?" Renea looked between them. "Know him? Child? He's been paying me for information about you for the last decade. Every credit he could spare, every favor he could call in." Korvax shuffled to an ancient data terminal. "All to keep track of the last princess of Vera." "I'm no princess. The royal line died with your parents. Yes." Korvax pulled up a holographic genealogy tree, golden lines connecting names in Veyron script. "But you survived. The last of the Titan bloodline, the only one who can activate the accordance." Darius felt Renaya go rigid beside him. "The accordance is a myth. The accordance is very real." Korvax touched the screen and schematics appeared, some kind of massive technological construct. A network of hidden Veyron installations across the galaxy, weapons, ships, resources, all locked by genetic encryption. Only Titan blood can activate them. That's why the Council really wants you dead, Darius said quietly. Not terrorism. They know if you activate the Accordance, you'll have enough firepower to challenge their rule. But first, Korvax said, you need the proof of your innocence. The data core in the Council's private vault contains records of the Veyron massacre, including their real reason for it. The heart metal mines were just bonus. They wanted to ensure the Accordance could never be activated. 30 levels up, Darius said, already running scenarios, through the maximum security sector. Impossible, Korvax said. Improbable. Darius pulled out his tactical display. But I've got 6 different approaches mapped and… You knew. Renea's voice cut through his planning like a plasma blade. You knew what I was. The accusation hung in the air. Korvax discreetly shuffled to the back room, leaving them alone among the memory crystals. I knew you were important to them, Darius admitted. Found out about the Titan bloodline 8 years ago, the Accordance 5 years ago. But you came anyway. No, I came because… He met her eyes, watched her patterns cycle through confusion. You think I care about ancient weapons, political power. I care that you're alive. The little girl who saved a scared human came before the princess, before the weapon, before the symbol. I was never just a little girl. Her voice carried weight he'd never heard before. Even then, I was the heir, the future, the responsibility. Not to me. He stepped closer, had to crane his neck back to maintain eye contact. To me, you were Renea, who laughed at my bad Veyron pronunciation and shared her lunch and held me in her hand like I was something precious instead of something breakable. Her patterns flared, cycling through emotions too complex to parse. If you knew about the Accordance, you could have used it. Could have what? Activated ancient weapons without you? Used your bloodline for my own gain? He laughed, short and sharp. Ranea, I've had your genetic sequence for 5 years. I could have sold it to the highest bidder, could have cloned what they needed, could have done 100 things that would have made me rich beyond measure. Instead, I'm standing in a memory parlor in the ass end of the undergrowth because I made a promise to keep you safe, not use you. She moved so fast he didn't see it coming. One moment he was standing, the next she'd lifted him off his feet, holding him at eye level with one hand under each arm like he weighed nothing. You impossible little human, she breathed, her patterns blazing gold-white-silver. Technically, I'm average height for a human. She kissed him. It was awkward. The size difference made it challenging, but her lips were soft and tasted like alien spices and starlight, and her patterns danced colors that definitely had no names in any language he knew. When she pulled back, his brain took several seconds to restart. That was… Shut up. She set him down gently, her patterns pulsing embarrassed blue-green. We have a data core to steal. But she was smiling, and her hand found his as they walked back to where Korvax waited, and her pattern stayed warm gold for the rest of the conversation. The abandoned hydroponics garden stretched 3 levels high, its bioluminescent plants casting everything in blues and greens that made Renea's violet skin look like deep space between stars. They'd been hiding here 6 hours, waiting for the patrols to pass, and Darius had spent most of it pretending not to watch her pattern shift with each breath. Stop staring, she said, without looking up from the rifle she was cleaning. Stop glowing. Her patterns flared indignant orange. I don't glow. I have natural bioluminescence that… You glow. He grinned, checking his tactical display for the 100th time. Especially when you're annoyed, or interested, or about to throw you through that wall. That's a very specific shade of red, actually. More crimson with gold edges. She set down the rifle, rose to her full height. In 3 strides she crossed the space between them, and suddenly Darius found himself looking up at 9 feet of controlled power that could snap him like dry wood. "You've cataloged my patterns? I've had 20 years to study every holovid, every image, every second of footage I could find." He didn't back down, didn't look away. "I know you pulse blue-green when embarrassed, gold when amused, that deep purple when you're thinking hard about something. And right now," he tilted his head, studying the colors dancing across her skin. "Silver violet with gold threads. That's new." "What does it mean?" "No idea. But it started when I mentioned studying you for 20 years, so I'm guessing it's either attraction or you're planning my death. Possibly both." She laughed, sudden and genuine, and her patterns exploded into warm amber. "You really are impossible. Part of my charm. Is that what you call it?" But she hadn't moved back, still standing close enough that he could feel the heat from her patterns. "Show me." "Show you what?" "Your scars, your stories." She gestured to the lattice of old wounds visible on her arms. "You know mine. Every fight, every pit match, every assassination attempt. Fair's fair." Darius hesitated, then pulled off his tactical vest and shirt in one smooth motion. His torso was a road map of violence. Bullet scars, blade marks, burns, each one a mission, a close call, a price paid. Renea's eyes tracked across them, and he watched her pattern shift with each revelation. This one. Her finger hovered over a jagged scar along his ribs. Kremlar Slaver was asking too many questions about purple-skinned giants being sold through back channels. This? The scar across his shoulder. Council operative who was getting too close to your transport records, had to make him disappear before he could report. And this? Her finger stopped over his heart, where a starburst scar sat directly above where the pendant rested against his skin. That one. He met her eyes. "That was the day I thought you'd died. Got word you'd been executed in a riot at the Thessian prison. Went after the warden for answers. Turns out you'd been moved to a different facility the day before. The relief nearly killed me, literally. Warden's bodyguard got a lucky shot while I was processing the information." Her patterns cycled through colors he'd never seen, complex emotions that had no names in any language. Then she sat, pulling him down beside her, their backs against a wall covered in glowing moss. 20 years, she said quietly. "You gave up 20 years of your life for a childhood promise." "Not gave up, invested." He pulled out the pendant, letting it catch the garden's bioluminescent light. "You know what this really is, don't you?" Her pattern stilled. "It's heart metal, a child's. It's the royal seal of Vera." He watched her patterns flare shocked white. "Took me 5 years to figure that out. Only members of the royal bloodline can create them, the metal bonds to your genetic signature. This pendant makes whoever holds it a legal member of the royal family, an heir, technically." She stood so fast he almost fell over. "You knew? You've known for 15 years that you held the key to the Veyran fortune, access to treasury accounts on 17 worlds, legal claim to the accordance." He stood too, had to look up to meet her eyes. "Yeah, I knew." "Then why, you could have been one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. You could have what? Sold you out, used your birthright while you rotted in chains." He stepped closer, close enough to feel her pattern's warmth on his skin. "Renea, I didn't keep this pendant for power. I kept it because a 10-year-old girl trusted an 8-year-old boy with something precious. That trust means more than all the treasures of dead Vera." Her hand wrapped around his throat, gentle, but he could feel the strength held in check. "Why didn't you tell me?" "When? When you were in chains in the arena? In a cell being monitored? Or maybe while we were being shot at?" He reached up, wrapped his fingers around her wrist, couldn't even close them halfway. I'm telling you now because we might die in the next 12 hours, and you deserve to know the truth." "What truth?" "That you gave your throne to a scared human child because everyone else at that market treated you like untouchable royalty. You were lonely. I was lost. And somehow, that moment mattered more than bloodlines or politics or power." Her pattern shifted to deep violet gold, and she lifted him effortlessly until they were eye to eye. "You impossible, infuriating, brilliant little human. Still average height for—" She kissed him to shut him up. When she finally set him down, his brain took several seconds to remember how walking worked. "We should," he started. "If you say, 'Check the tactical display right now,' I will throw you into the wall." "I was going to say we should talk about what just—" A proximity alarm screamed. The council's private vault sat 30 levels up, protected by security systems that had never been breached in the Spire's 1,000-year history. Darius had been mapping them for 7 years. "You're insane," Renea said, studying his infiltration plan. "Using me as bait while you ghost through their systems?" "Not bait, distraction." He pulled up the holo schematic. "You let yourself be recaptured at checkpoint 7. While they're focused on containing you, thinking they've won, I'll be 16 levels up, already inside their security perimeter. And if they just execute me on sight—" "They won't. Vrex wants a public spectacle. He needs to make an example of you." Darius highlighted the timeline. "We've got 43 hours left. He'll want to parade you around, gloat, make sure the cameras are ready. That gives me a 90-minute window to get the data core and broadcast everything." Her patterns pulsed skeptical purple. "You've thought of everything?" "Everything I could model." He met her eyes. "But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She stood, moved to the window overlooking the vertical sprawl of the spire. "You know what you're asking, to put my life completely in your hands. You put my life in your hands once, on a crystal bridge." He joined her at the window. Fair's fair. Her pattern shifted to warm gold. "When you put it that way—" The capture went perfectly. Renea put on a show of resistance that would look good on the feeds, letting herself be surrounded at checkpoint 7. The guards were practically celebrating as they hauled her toward the detention center. Darius was already 20 levels higher, moving through maintenance shafts he'd mapped years ago. The vault's outer security was everything he'd expected: motion sensors, thermal imaging, genetic locks. He'd prepared for all of it. What he hadn't prepared for was Chancellor Vrex standing in the vault's main chamber, looking directly at the vent he was about to exit from. "Mr. Cole," Vrex said, tongue flicking with amusement. "Right on schedule." Darius dropped from the vent, landed in a crouch, hand on his weapon. 12 guards materialized from hidden positions, the exit sealed with magnetic locks. "You knew?" "The human who's been buying information about Titan blood for 2 decades. Vrex stood from behind the data console, all 8 feet of scaled arrogance. "Did you think we didn't notice? Every broker you paid, every database you hacked, every secret supply cache you hid, we knew. Then you know I'm very motivated. Motivated enough to die for her? A primitive from a dead world dying for the last of another dead world. How poetic." Vrex gestured and the guards raised their weapons. "Did you really think your little romance would have a happy ending?" "No." Darius smiled, the expression sharp enough to cut. "I thought it would have a just one." He pressed the trigger on the device he'd been holding since he dropped from the vent. Every holo screen in the spire, every public display, every private monitor, every feed broadcast to the galaxy flickered to life with the same message. 20 years ago, a child made a promise. Vrex's eyes went wide. "What did you—" 7 years of preparation, Chancellor. 7 years of planting transmitters, hiding broadcast nodes, embedding viral protocols in your own systems." Darius backed toward the data console. "You were so busy watching me chase Renea, You never noticed I was turning your spire into the galaxy's biggest broadcasting antenna. The screens began streaming everything. 20 years of evidence poured into the galaxy's consciousness. Financial records showing the Council funding the Veyron massacre. Secret recordings of Vrex himself ordering the execution of children. Witness testimonies from survivors Darius had spent decades protecting and hiding. The real reason for genocide, not justice, but greed for heart metal minds and fear of the accordance. But the masterstroke was the viral protocol itself. It couldn't be stopped without shutting down the entire spire's power grid, and that would kill millions in the lower levels who depended on life support. "Kill him!" Vrex roared. The guards opened fire. Darius was already moving, years of training compressed into instinct. He rolled behind the data console, came up firing. 2 guards down. A dive to the left, another shot, another guard falling. But there were too many and he was running out of cover. Then the detention center wall exploded. Ranea stood in the breach, graviton shackles hanging broken from her wrists. She'd been holding back the entire time, waiting for his signal. The broadcast had been it. "Hello, Chancellor," she said, patterns blazing war crimson. "Did you really think those chains could hold me?" She moved like a force of nature. Guards flew through the air, weapons crumpled in her hands, armor designed to stop military-grade rounds folded like paper under her fists. Darius covered her flanks, his precision complementing her power, their combat synchronization beyond conscious thought. When a guard got a clear shot at Darius's back, Ranea crossed 15 feet in a heartbeat, taking the energy blade meant for him across her shoulder. The smell of burnt flesh filled the air. Something in Darius's mind went very, very quiet. The next 60 seconds would be scrubbed from most broadcast feeds, deemed too violent for public consumption. The human who'd spent 20 years becoming the perfect weapon for one perfect moment finally showed why Earth's special forces had been feared across the galaxy. He moved through the remaining guards like death itself, efficient, brutal, absolute. When the last guard fell, only Vrex remained, backed against the wall, scales pale with fear. "You're monsters," he whispered. "Both of you." "No," Ranea said, one hand pressed to her bleeding shoulder. "We're survivors. There's a difference." The arena crowds were already rioting. The feeds showed chaos across the spire as citizens realized they'd been lied to for 20 years. Security forces were abandoning posts, government officials fleeing. "Please," Vrex begged. "I have information, wealth, I can—" "You have nothing." Ranea lifted him one-handed, his feet dangling. "But I'm not going to kill you." Darius raised an eyebrow. Even Vrex looked shocked. "Death would be mercy," she continued. "You get to live. You get to watch everything you built crumble. You get to see the galaxy learn exactly who you are." She dropped him, and he crumpled to the floor. The council chambers were in chaos when they arrived. The few remaining officials cowered as Ranea strode in, Darius at her side, both of them covered in blood and burn marks but very much alive. The cameras tracked their every move, billions watching across the galaxy. Ranea moved to the center of the chamber, where the Accordance activation console had been hidden for 20 years. The Council had kept it as a trophy, proof of their victory over Veyra. "I am Ranea Veyra," she announced, her voice carrying to every feed. "Last of the Titan blood, heir to the Veyran throne." She pressed her palm to the console. It blazed to life, recognizing her genetic signature. Across the galaxy, hidden installations activated, weapons platforms, shipyards, resource caches, enough military power to challenge the Council's rule, to take revenge for 20 years of lies. "I could claim vengeance for my people," she continued. "I could use our technology to build an empire of retribution, to make them pay for every Veyran life lost." The chamber held its breath. Darius watched her pattern cycle through emotions: rage, grief, hope. "But I choose something else." Her hand found his, fingers intertwining despite the size difference. "I choose the promise a human child made to a Veyron girl, that kindness transcends species, that loyalty transcends politics, that love transcends revenge." She turned back to the console, began entering new commands. The accordance was meant to be Veyra's sword. Today, it becomes our shelter. Every hidden installation is now a refugee center. Every weapons platform becomes a supply station. Every ship will carry those who have no home to safety. The broadcast showed coordinates appearing across star charts, hundreds of locations where the displaced could find shelter, food, medical care. "Veyra is reborn," Ranea announced, "not as a military power but as a sanctuary for all displaced peoples, including humanity's scattered refugees. We will not repeat the cycle of vengeance. We will break it." The chamber erupted, some in protest, others in wonder. But Darius saw only her, this woman who'd chosen creation over destruction, who'd taken 20 years of pain and transformed it into hope. "You realize what you've just done?" he asked quietly. "Change the galaxy?" She smiled, patterns dancing gold and silver. "Seemed like a good idea. You're rubbing off on me with all your clever plans." "I meant you've just made yourself the biggest target in known space. Every faction that wants those resources will have to go through us." She lifted him again, bringing them eye to eye as cameras captured everything. "You promised to save me, little human. Looks like you'll be busy for a while." "Technically, you saved yourself. I just provided a distraction. Technically, you orchestrated the downfall of the most powerful government in the galaxy using nothing but determination and a childhood pendant." Her patterns pulsed warm gold. "I think that counts." She kissed him then, in front of the cameras, in front of the galaxy, making their partnership undeniably clear. When she set him down, the feeds were going insane with commentary, but Darius heard none of it. All he heard was her whisper, "Promise kept." Years later, the restored Veyron citadel was smaller than its predecessor but more beautiful for its diversity. Humans, Veyrons, and a dozen other refugee species worked together in vertical gardens that spiraled up the station's core. The sound of children laughing echoed through halls that had once known only silence. Darius stood on their private balcony, watching the sunset paint the viewport purple and gold. Artificial, of course, but beautiful nonetheless. The pendant rested against his chest, warm as always, but now it was joined by a second chain, a marriage band in the Veyron tradition, sized perfectly for his human proportions. Ranea ducked through the doorway, still getting used to spaces built for multiple species rather than just giants. "The Council's demanding you return the data core." "What data core?" He grinned, not turning from the view. "Must have been destroyed in the fighting." "The one you're using as leverage to keep them from retaliating?" "That data core, yeah, very destroyed. Tragic." She laughed, moving to stand beside him. Even after 6 months, the size difference still amused visitors. The 9-foot warrior queen and her human consort. The hollow feeds had tried to make it scandalous. They'd failed. Hard to scandalize a love story that had saved millions. "You gave up everything," she said, growing serious. "Your freedom, your anonymity, your carefully built networks, all for a childhood promise." He finally turned to her, pulled out the pendant. "Not just a promise, an investment." "In what?" "The future." He gestured to the garden visible below, where human and Veyron children played together. "Besides, you still owe me from when you carried me across that bridge." Her patterns flared with indignation and amusement. "I saved your life, and I saved yours, so we're even." He paused, pretending to consider. "Want to go for best 2 out of 3?" She lifted him effortlessly, his feet dangling, bringing them eye to eye. "Little human, you're still terrible at negotiations. Good thing I'm better at keeping promises." Two small forms burst onto the balcony. A boy with golden eyes and violet-tinged skin, a girl with silver hair and patterns that glowed faint blue when she laughed. They couldn't be more than 3 years old, but already the boy showed his father's strategic mind and his mother's strength. "Mama! Papa!" They spoke in a mixture of Terran and Veyron, creating their own pidgin language. "Tell us the story." "Which story?" Renea asked, though she knew. "The promise story," they chorused. Darius and Renea exchanged glances. It had become their children's favorite bedtime tale. How a small human boy met a giant girl, how a promise was made and kept, how love could bridge any gap. "Well," Darius began, still suspended in Renea's grip while their children gathered around her legs, 23 years ago, on a crystal bridge. The pendant glowed warm between them as he told the story, and Renea's patterns danced gold and silver in colors that still had no names but meant home, meant family, meant promises kept and futures built. The holofeeds would call it the greatest love story of the age. The human who spent 20 years planning the perfect rescue, and the Titan blood who was worth the wait. But for Darius and Renea, watching their children's eyes go wide with wonder at a story they'd heard 100 times, it was simpler than that. It was a promise kept, and it was just the beginning.